As a follow up to the previous podcast entitled Going to Mars, here we explore how and why humans will make Mars their new home. The closest we get, as an analogy, might be the occupation of Greenland by the Vikings or the American West by European and US pioneers. Of course, Mars or the Moon are significantly different in scope to the Outback or the American Southwest, but there are similarities. The most obvious parallels are A, the remote nature of settlements, B, the limited supplies available and the requirement to live off the land, and C, the harsh environmental conditions. For the moment, we'll exclude the presence of hostile indigenous persons objecting to new arrivals. The same goes for wild animals, with one exception being the possibility of microorganisms. Traveling several thousand miles across the Pacific or Atlantic is analogous to today's treks across more than one astronomical unit of space. It took Christopher Columbus 6 weeks to find the New World, and that time was not greatly reduced over the next 2 centuries. With buildable nuclear engines, humans could get to Mars in a few months. Our forefathers had to take all rations with them, as there was no guarantee for finding replacements along the way. They took seeds for planting along with animals. In deep space, the probability of resupply is zero. The possibility of death or injury is just as, if not more, likely as in Columbus time. Essentials include breathable air, reliable energy, life support, food, tools, and navigation, greatly compounding the many difficulties. Catastrophe for the 18th and 19th century pioneers could come from a lack of medicine, ammunition, trading goods, or common sense. The scorching sun, raging flood, or shrieking typhoon or blizzard could silently end their lives 1,000 miles from the nearest city. Be it 500, 1,000, or 30 million miles, it makes no difference to those in need. In the age of exploration we're familiar with, most journeys were undertaken for profit. Of the 5 ships Magellan set out with to the Far East, only one returned to Europe after circumnavigation of the planet. Magellan himself was killed in the Philippines and never made it home. Yet, with only one ship full of spices, and not counting all of the dead or marooned sailors, the ship paid well. It was the cutting off of trade by the Ottoman Empire that sparked the Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, and English to build better ships for their cargoes of pepper, cinnamon tea, and nutmeg. Through subterfuge or brute force, these robber barons wished to control or steal away the markets monopolized by the Muslims. Indigenous peoples posed little threat to Europeans. In North and South America, their microbial stowaways did much of their work for them in decimating populations. Those left over were forced into slavery to work gold and silver mines or operate farms and ranches. From the days of the Roman Empire, wealth was based upon land and the food or resources it could yield. Those with the most land were those with thuggish armies and no scruples preventing their robbing from those who worked it. Though the system has morphed over the millennia, there has been little change. It has always been the state and its cronies deciding who owns what, since it is a monopoly of force. All ownership of land or rights over its use is controlled by the same powers who've always claimed them. So many great men in history were primarily land speculators. George Washington was once the largest landowner in the United States. One of his first ventures was as stockholder in a land company chartered for Ohio by Virginia and the English Crown. Washington's party was sent to Ohio, already contested by a treaty with France and local tribes. The shooting of French diplomats by his party sparked the 7 Years' War. The Whiskey Rebellion was an excuse for Washington to look over future acquisitions in Pennsylvania. While there, he commanded an army greater than any under him in the war. Benjamin Franklin also owned substantial property and could have gone either way on independence. Andrew Jackson robbed the Cherokee of their land after they lived the white man's farming lifestyle for generations. Later, settlers were lured to the United States with promises of homesteads or places where small groups or individuals could carve out property for themselves by virtue of sweat equity. Throughout the ages, kings and conquerors would hand out land to their co-conspirators as part of the plunder and were not expected to make improvements for this privilege. Will there be treasures enough on the moon or Mars which justify the trip? The jury is still out. Significant prospecting is required involving many people, expensive equipment, and the establishment of infrastructure. By reducing the cost of transportation, SpaceX will open many new doors, and I hope and predict they'll outstrip government efforts to independently create an abundance of opportunities. As balanced trade between Mars and Earth is questionable, perhaps Musk's vision of establishing a viable settlement there is enough. As long as he directs his vision, I expect a practical approach. As with the Starship project and his credo, the best part is no part. I don't see an excess of extravagance or unneeded supplies being sent. Granted, the settlers would be allowed some personal items, but this will be kept to a minimum, and they'll create what they need from their surroundings. Zubrin's Mars Direct vision is quite logical but extremely minimal. At the time, there was no inkling of anything like Starship for both heavy lift capacity and drastically lowered cost through the reuse of vehicles. As in the podcast entitled Going to Mars, this opens up new opportunities for providing redundancy and safety. Zubrin mentions the cost and weight savings in not taking all of that fuel with you for the return trip and making use of a free return trajectory. The Angry Astronaut podcast is in favor of establishing a base on Phobos. The advantage here would be remote control of robotic operations on the surface, such as setting up habitats, water, and fuel processing. Mars is much too far from Earth to do this in anything close to real time. The communication delays are too long. Pre-programming equipment in fits and starts, as is done with the Mars rovers, won't be practical. Launching a string of equatorial and aerostationary satellites would provide communications and location data for controllers in orbit and surface equipment. Everyone wants to be the first one to land a human being on Mars. Many early settlers will die there, just as they did in the Americas. We forget that early air travel took the lives of many wanting to be first. The much vaunted NASA has been extremely lucky in not losing more astronauts than they have. What they have demonstrated is that unjustified bureaucratic timelines, unnaturally slowing down or speeding up processes, is deadly. The Russians have killed as many or more than NASA. Setting up a station on Phobos with spin gravity and landing semi-autonomous robots on Mars is wiser. It's the best, though not foolproof, way to go. Let's say people are sent to the surface, but fuel processing has issues. They won't be able to leave. But if there are habitats already established with power, food, and available water, then they could stay until the problems are solved. Though precious metals may be extracted from Mars for trade with Earth, it is difficult to tell what other products may make returning them profitable. Possibly the reduced gravity would aid in the manufacture of novel products or materials. The first industries on Mars will be those which directly cater to the settlers. These include the smelting of metals like steel and aluminum, processing of water for drinking, and synthesis of rocket fuel, acetylene, and other products, and processing regolith to transform into crop soils. While prospecting for water and minerals, there will be many holes dug suitable for shelters. The simplest way of shielding dangerous cosmic rays is to go underground. Pressure and load-proof shelters may be placed in trenches or tunnels and covered by the regolith above. Current tunnelers made by the Boring Company should fit into a Starship. These machines create bricks to line tunnels as they are dug, provided enough water is available. To supply inexhaustible energy for running light and heavy equipment, a set of liquid fluoride thorium reactors makes the most sense. Thorium fuel does not require enrichment, as it can be separated chemically along with any waste products. Thorium cycle uses thorium-232, which comprises over 90% of the naturally occurring element available on Earth, Mars, or the Moon. Reactors breed the U-233, from which energy is derived from fission. U-235 only makes up a few percent of naturally occurring uranium. Additional thorium fuel may be added without taking the reactor offline. Designs as small as 3 meters in diameter by 2 meters high could provide as much as 25 megawatts of power. Such reactors could also be mobile. Earth moving, drilling, smelting, and other tasks require great amounts of energy. Reactors as large as 40 tons could be landed in a Starship to provide hundreds of megawatts each. The salts containing the fuel may be packaged separately in complete safety for launch. Vehicles could be powered directly, use battery packs, or even synthetic hydrocarbons. The heavy lift capability of Starship will allow practical transport of the vital equipment needed in the hostile environment of Mars. Prospecting, drilling, and processing of water will take a lot of energy. Recent surveys indicate significant amounts of water available only a meter down in the Valles Marineris. Remains of a glacier are indicated over an area 6 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide at coordinates 7 degrees 33 minutes south, 93 degrees 14 minutes west in the far eastern end of the Noctis Labyrinthus, complete with crevasses and moraine fields. Though water has not been detected directly in this location, a fair amount could be found below. Any water found on Mars, the Moon, or Ceres will be extremely salty. First, the ice-yielding regolith must be warmed to remove the water, desalinated or evaporated, and purified for storage or other processes. The Valles Marineris is the most sensible place to establish human settlement, as it is likely to hold the most resources. It is a 3,000-mile-long cut, as much as 3 miles deep near the equator. Orbital launches from near the equator are also easier. As a low point, it only makes sense that much of the water on the surface long ago flowed into this vast canyon. Gentle but constant winds have continued pushing material into this depression, including precious metals. Being one of the lowest points on Mars, the valley is also the warmest, with the highest atmospheric pressure. Though this pressure is still less than 1% of Earth, there are benefits in reducing cosmic rays or maintaining higher temperatures. Martian soil contains a high amount of perchlorates, which are toxic to humans and most food crops. These may be removed as the water is treated or in later steps. Washing the regolith in water can remove much, but there are catalysts available to increase efficiency. There are even microbes which can process them and may be the best method of all. A perchlorate consists partially of chlorine plus 4 oxygen molecules and may provide an abundant source for humans or rocket engines. Some are used in explosives or solid rocket boosters. To best utilize energy and available resources, settlers need creative processes. Hydrogen for synthesis of methane in the Sabatier process will come from water. Carbon is available in the thin CO2 atmosphere. Thorium reactors mentioned earlier should use turbines driven by supercritical CO2 rather than water, with efficiencies approaching 60%. The processing of air, water, soil, and waste on a large scale will be critical. Fortunately, the techniques for doing so are well studied. While maximum efficiencies should be sought, to date, no fully sustainable biodome has been achieved. The lives of settlers should not be sacrificed for such false goals as 100% recycling of resources. The key is energy, which is readily available in safe, low-cost nuclear power. With power and flexible manufacturing facilities available, Mars settlers will come up with surprising innovations that benefit their community and perhaps find uses on Earth. Air handling over vast scales, as in semiconductor foundries, has been done for decades. This includes temperature, particulate, and humidity controls for keeping processes stable. In the 1980s, I had a friend who worked at the Smithsonian developing self-sustaining biomes, but primarily in large fish tanks. The most impressive one I saw, however, was a recreation of the Everglades inside a large greenhouse. Fresh water flowed into it at one end, becoming more brackish at the other, where it was desalinated and pumped back to start. There are many species of frogs, fish, plants, and insects, a nearly self-sustaining environment. He told me that they developed these systems to the point of adding only a small amount of nutrients for balance. In addition, there were many cities contracting with them about using their plant combinations for sewage treatment. It goes without saying that if there were not such a phenomenon as Elon Musk, who possesses the triple combination of vision, vast resources, and leadership, the prospect of selling Mars would not exist. Starlink will provide fuel for keeping his dream alive for the next 20 years, barring unforeseen disaster. Driving down costs allows all kinds of prospects for settlers and hopefully other billionaires with similar dreams. Though some help may be available from Earth, Mars residents will need to think on their feet, as any pioneer does. In the end, it will be the tenacity of Martians to build a new world which will make or break the long-term presence of human beings on another planet.